Let me start by asking you a fun question. What do you think appeared first, a chicken or an egg? Type in your answer in the chat and let us know what you think. Um, yes, now here's another question for you all. Less fun, but relevant. When you develop your applications, what do you create first? Your entities or your database schema? Again, you can type in your answer in the chat, or you can also answer the poll that we have in the chat for you. Which one of these approach do you think is better? Does the answer depend on a specific use case? Is there a checklist you could use? All of these are good questions, but I don't have answers to them. Don't worry, because our speaker today definitely does. Hi everyone, thanks for joining in for another IntelliJ IDEA live stream. I'm your host Mala Gupta, and now let me add our speaker to the stream. Hey Andrey, it's a pleasure to have you present with us today.
Hi, Mala. Nice to see you. Hi, everybody.
Nice to see you too, and I'm so looking forward to learn from you in this session.
Thank you, Mala. I will do my best.
I'm sure you definitely would. So let me quickly introduce Andrey. Andrey is a software developer on the IntelliJ IDEA Ultimate team, and he works on various plugins and now primarily focused on IntelliJ IDEA. So, Andrey, I know that you are one of the developers of JPA Buddy, which is now a part of IDEA Ultimate. And I also know that you'll be talking a lot of good features about this in your session today. So I want to ask you a question, which is probably you will not be covering in your session, which is one of the most underrated IntelliJ IDEA feature.
Well, according to statistics, the most underrated feature is gutters. It sounds weird. They are visible, but still they are not very used by our developers.
Perfect. And I hope if you could show some example of that to our users, they would definitely be using it more and it will not remain an underrated feature anymore.
For sure.
Okay. And on that note, I would like to invite and add our expert on the live stream, Franck Pachot.
Hello. Happy to
Hi,
be there.
Franck. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. I tried.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Thank you so much. So Franck is a developer advocate for Yoga Byte DB, which is an open source distributed SQL database compatible with Postgres. I know it's a boring one. So in short, Franck will be our expert, and he would be talking. He's a longtime DB consultant, and he is here to share another opinion on what Andrey would be presenting. Right, Franck?
Yeah, my point of view as a long-time DBA and
you were also talking about some friction or some argument that keeps going between developers and when you talk about database. If you could talk about that a little bit.
yeah, that's right. It's very common in enterprises that developers and operations have different point of views because they have also different managers and different goals. But for the success of the projects, much better to discuss and share the point of views rather than fighting.
Makes sense. So before I let you both start with your session, let me share some housekeeping details for everyone who's watching the session today. Please use YouTube chat to post your question. Andrey and Franck will answer your question as you type them or towards the end of their session. And yes, the session is being recorded and will be hosted on IntelliJ IDEA's YouTube channel and also on JetBrains Twitch channel. So if you haven't already subscribed to our channels, now is the time to do so that you do not miss similar content in the future. And last, not the least, if you like today's session, which I hope you will, do not forget to like this video. On that note, Franck and Andrey, I'll be backstage and I'll let you move forward with your session. Have fun.
Thank you, Mala. And let me start. So while developing the IDE, we usually consider different use cases. So how developers use the IDE, what do they develop, etc. And since the most of the applications are working with the database, the question that you heard in the beginning of the session is pretty important. So how developers behave when we start implementing the application, what do they develop first, and how our IDEs can help them in this development flow. So you have poll in our chat, and please don't hesitate to vote. We gathered some statistics before, and you can see some numbers right now. We have this proportion of developers. We have, let's say, 2 camps of developers that use different approaches in the application development. And the code first approach loses with a small margin. So why is that? What is going on here, and how we can help with both camps, we'll see in our lecture. So let us start. We'd say there are 2 main arguments between 2 camps of developers. So code-first approach, developers who use this approach say that we use code-first approach because we model data right in the place where it's being consumed. So, which is a fair point. So application processes the data. It means that we need to create our data models which are relevant to the business area which application works in. But another point of view is database always outlive the application. So Franck, based on your experience, does database always outlive the application?
I think from my experience it does, because I've seen databases that have been modeled 20 or 30 years ago, but probably the code hopefully is not the same, and has evolved and maybe has changed, has migrated. For example, when I started with databases, Java was not there, and now there is a lot of Java, but maybe the database is the same, the database schema is the same. So yeah, we used to say that application come and go, and database stay.
Okay, fantastic. So probably that's a valid point, and we'll see. Well, I have some doubts actually, but I will share some those doubts with you a bit later. And let's see and how we can. What are the pros and cons of both camps of developers in our chat? So when we use code-first approach, what is the good thing about that? Code is the single source of truth. It means that what we model, that we store. Again, data is consumed in the application. So code is the part of the application, and that's why code goes first. Code-first approach simplifies processing data in the application, because especially when we have database automatically generated, we can don't think about database schema while implementing our business model. It means that we can do prototyping faster. We don't need to think about database schema because in our world, in code world, database is just one of the data sources, and we don't care how our database access framework will store data. Data source can be everything. It can be database, it can be external API, it can be, I don't know, message queue. But what is important is code. What is important is algorithm. So that's why code-first approach allows us to implement functionality faster, because we think in business model. But what is the backside of this approach? First is inefficient DB schema. Franck, again, I need your experience here, and based on your experience, can you say that database was generated some kind of framework? So have you? Can you
often
note it? Yeah.
From the queries, you see how it has been generated, but from the schema, for example, if it was only generated from the code without changing the data model, you will not see any partition, even if you have tables that will grow. You probably see very limited indexes, maybe the indexes on the foreign key, not more complex indexes. And something where I see a big difference usually when developers start with code, the generation finally has single colon primary keys and probably surrogate keys. Where when you think about the data model from the data point of view, you have many composite keys, especially when you have composition with parent child and you have a composite primary key. Probably it's my way to know if it has been generated from code or thought from the data.
Okay, yeah. Again, fair point. Well, based on my experience with some ORMs, mostly with Hibernate, well, composite keys can be sometimes tricky, and that's why developers, don't like introducing them too often, unless it is, unnecessary.
So that means that you see the constraints when it's generated by the application. You see the constraints of the JPA framework. When it's generated by the database, you see the constraints of the database in the other.
Yeah, that's the point. That's again a valid point, and yeah, we'll talk about it in the second part of our presentation when we talk about the database first approach. And the third thing is that, well, despite on the fact that we have auto-generated database things, we at some point of development, we will need to introduce a database migration tools, for sure, Liquibase, Flyway, whatever. And in this point of the application lifecycle, we'll need to synchronize not just our database schema with the code, but also the scripts. So how the code first approach looks while we are developing something. So, for example, we have the version 1 of our application, and we decided to develop a kind of feature, a new feature. We branch our code and start developing our feature. Meanwhile, we are developing the version 3. Meanwhile, someone else has developed version 2 of our application. It means that our databases are not synced. Also, our code base is not in synchronization. So at some point, we need to merge our changes into the main branch, master branch, or whatever you prefer. And it means that here we have a problem of merging. And with the code first approach, this merging is much simpler to my mind, because the code is the only source of truth, and code base is like unified, and we have a single code base. It means all we need to do is just to synchronize our code and generate scripts that will update the existing version of our database based on our code changes. And this is easier because generating database changes based on code it's usually easier. Even we can do it even automatically or with our tools. So that's the advantage of code first approach. So it is simpler to synchronize changes because the code base is a single thing. So let's see how it looks in practice, and we are going to use the pet clinic application. I'm not sure if most of my auditory has some experience with a Spring framework and the pet clinic application. It's kind of universal demo application for all Spring developers. But here you can see a simple database schema that illustrates the application. So we have a small pet clinic, and we have owners that have pets, and pets sometimes visit our clinic. And you probably see the gap. So we don't know which veterinarian participated in the visit. So who treated our pet. So in this case, so now in the in our example, we will create a link between a visit and a pet using code-first approach. So let me start the code. So here is the my code base, and I'm going to update my visit application. I'm going to use Spring Data JPA, and here I'm introducing the veterinarian in my entity. So let me say that it's going to be many-to-one relation, and let me create getters and setters for my veterinarian. Also, just for sake of the simplicity, not for the sake of de-optimization my queries, Frank will just say some bad words about me like now. Right now, I'm going to fetch my data eagerly, meaning that when we select a visit, we will also make an additional query to select a veterinarian. And here we are going to say that veterinarian is going to be mandatory for the visit. So no visit can happen without a veterinarian. So here we have like a simple change, how we can implement it in the database. So let's start our application. For a starter, imagine that we are implementing it as a developers, and here we just changed our database, and now we have a failure. What's that? Hibernate, have a validation option, and IDEA knows how to process this issue, the validation failure of the Hibernate. And while we are developing our feature, like experimenting here on our local database, we can quickly fix the issue right in place. So the IDEA will generate us a DDL to fix this issue. You see, we have visits, we are adding columns, we are adding constraints, and we even can run it in our database console. But that's fine. We're doing quick and dirty work. We are fixing our issues, and now our model is like perfect, and we are going to implement it in our versioning scripts.
Let me just interrupt you because we have a remark. Shouldn't the relationship be many to many? Yeah, in real words.
That's a good question. Yeah, it's not a problem to make it many to many. That's fine. But usually we have one veterinarian treating your pet, and well, we can change our model later if we need it. But for now, business
and maybe I will complain more about the eager fetching with a many to many.
Yeah. But yeah, so we'll definitely work with many to many here during the demo. So now we need to update our scripts, and what we are going to do is just say in our Liquibase folder we should say generate Liquibase changelog. We compare our model with the DB, and IDEA will create the scripts in the XML format for our changelog. So we can preview what is going on, and you see we even sort changes based on their, like, let's say, the degree of dangerous. So dropping column is not a good idea right now. So we don't have it in our model, but we have in our database. It means that we need it. We don't need it in our application for now. To fix that, we can just ignore this change and apply other changes in our to our database. What else? You see, this is the add null construct, and again, we know that adding not null values requires default value.
Yeah.
So here we just update our changelog. So IDEA is happy now. We're saving our changelog. Here it is, and now we can apply it. we will use automatic apply for our pet cleaning application. Let's run it. Database is updated. And now we can check our data. To do that, I have an endpoint in our application. Sorry, it's going to be owner controller. So we have an endpoint. Let's generate request here, and let's create the, yeah, I know the ID of the owner that I want to check. And now we are okay with that. So you see, the visit now has a reference to a veterinarian with the default ID 1. That's great. So this is the code-first approach. So we changed our code. We checked it locally in a quick and dirty way. We just generated like scripts, updated the database, and after checking everything, we generate our database update scripts. And after that, we apply it to the database. So this works fine if your framework supports that. So if you can generate different diff scripts easily based on your database access framework. So what are the advantages of the code-first approach? Again, you see, it's much faster to update database because, well, framework is responsible for validating database. You have tools to generate scripts quicker, and for local database, we are okay to lose the data because it's our local data and it's not a problem. Well, it works greatly if we have one application per database. As soon as we have one application per database, it means that this is the correct implementation of our business area. And application is the only thing responsible for representing the business model. So as soon as we have our database shared, as soon as we have our database, well, used in different applications that represent different business models, well, code first is not a great approach.
And you don't want the same mapping in all applications, because if you don't use a colon, you don't want to fetch it.
Exactly. That's what I'm talking about. And yeah, again, so frameworks, if we use some ORM frameworks, and if we generate our data based on those frameworks, we have suboptimal database schema. After introducing changes, we still need consultancy of a good DBA to make sure that we use all the database features properly and correctly.
And test the migration also, because what you did, adding a colon, a not null colon with a default, in some databases that can be fast, just metadata update in the catalog. In other databases, it will have to go to all rows and set the value. So test it for your database and your version of the database. I mean, cannot just test it and think that it will work the same on all SQL databases.
Yeah, and automatic generation is not a great idea. We will need just proper migration tools to do proper database update. Why is that? Because we don't want to lose data. We are okay with like schema changes, but we don't want to lose the data. Well, that was the code-first approach. Again, you see, it was simple, straightforward, and well, with proper tooling, it's like it works like a charm.
Before, maybe I can read a comment from Andrea Spice, who says, "Not my idea of code first. I mean domain first concern and persistence concern later." I think you answered that with having multiple applications. Like it's not the domain that you put in the code; it's the domain for an application, right?
Yeah. So. Andrey, you're right. So it's about like terminology. What I'm saying code first, I mean model first or domain first. and persistence later, for sure. Again, what I was saying. So when we are talking about code first approach, we say that our domain model is the key. It is the single source of truth, and we just store data somehow. We just rely on our framework. That's the code first approach. What I meant. So, Andres, I hope I answered your question. Answer your comment. So DB first approach works differently, and this is what Franck usually prefer, I believe. So first, we create the database. So we model not the business, we model the business from the point of data storage. So we model how data is stored, but not exactly how it processed, but what we need for business, what data
but
we needed.
It's still based on the domain, but from a
Yes.
database point of view. But it's still based on the entities
For
of
sure.
the domain.
Yeah. And this approach allows us to use databases at a full scale. So all those bitmap indexes, like distributed tables, table spaces, etc., 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 we can add it to our database model. And this is the thing that I said before, that database outlives the application. So what I would say here is not the database outlives the application. Data outlives the application. Database as a schema changes. It changes constantly because, well, business requirements change. Data processing algorithms change. We need to normalize data. We need to denormalize data sometimes, but the data itself stays. We can even switch database management systems. Like we can move from Postgre to MySQL and vice versa to Oracle, whatever. But data stays. And usually when people say database outlives the application, they say they mean data outlives the application.
Or we can also say that the database sees new use cases also. Even if the application stays, it comes with new use cases. So the database that you design today and where you put data on it today will see very different use cases, because maybe marketing has another idea and wants to implement something that needs a different access pattern to the data.
Yeah, sure. But still, database doesn't live in a vacuum. We still need to access data somehow. And that's where some limitations come into play. Again, we are talking about JPA, for example, JPA or Hibernate. When you design a database, you need to take into account constraints that application development framework applies to your data schema. By the way, Franck, did you ever made changes in database schemas that were aimed to improve the performance of a database access framework, like denormalizing?
Yes, sure. Ideally, they are only physical changes. The nice thing with SQL is that you have physical logical independence. So there are many things that you can do physically where you don't have to change the application. For example, indexes, you can create the indexes. It doesn't change the application because the application doesn't query indexes. Or maybe you can do something and hide it behind a view so that what the application sees is still the same. Partitioning also should be transparent to the application, but of course, depending on the databases, you don't have all possibilities for it, so you have to care about that. Denormalization, that's very different, because if you denormalize, like you duplicate data from the parent to the child, for example, you have to do something in the application. You can also try to maintain it in the database with triggers if you like it, but usually you have something to do in the application, and then that's not independent. And then you do something on the database that seems easy, but when you have to query it with the application, then it's maybe more complex.
Yeah,
Depends on the changes. Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of universal answer. It depends. It
Depends. Yeah.
really depends in our IT world. It really depends on the application, on the requirements, on the whatever, on the framework and vendor, etc. But
Also,
still,
maybe it depends on the organization itself, on your in your company, the agility of your team.
yeah, who could thought
and
that human
and
factor?
DevOps. If
Also,
DevOps and DBA and developers discuss together, they can iterate, refactor easily. If it's two team and they have to synchronize and it takes months to synchronize, then it's more difficult. Yeah.
yeah. So database first approach probably, makes DBAs a bit more important than developers because well, it those changes come from DBAs first, and then developers had to adopt their code to the new
Yeah.
data model.
My experience, I've seen a lot of DBAs, and a
Mhm.
lot of DBAs think that the application is the database and do not think about the application itself. And they didn't realize that even the life cycle of objects, business objects, start in the application and then go to the database. And you cannot do whatever you want in the database if the application is not aware of it.
Yeah, that's yeah, that's the thing that should be always keep in mind. And well, the thing that we need to consider when we're using DB first approach is just you've just said that we need to synchronize our changes with the code. We need to remember that application is the thing that uses the data, that the data just cannot live there, cannot lie there. Application uses that and process it. So we need to synchronize our changes with code. We need to update our code according to the changes in the schema. And in this case, development flow looks almost exactly like that. So we are developing two features, but now we don't have a single source of truth. We have two database versions. When we need to merge our changes, we have two database versions. We need to merge them properly. So we need to update our scripts so they won't contradict each other. So they won't use different columns, etc., etc. And after this, we'll need to re-update our code. So once we develop our feature, we update our database, and now we need to reapply those changes and, well, rethink a bit our feature because, well, new changes could arrive, and the code may not fit the new database schema. So this is a bit trickier than the database update based on code because, again, we don't have like the one source of truth. We will need to merge our schemas, not the code, which is much easier. And merging schemas is always dangerous because we can lose data. One wrong script and that's it. So guys always do backups. So after that,
And also maybe you want to run two versions of the application on the same database. Maybe you don't want to roll out a new version of the application all at once, and then you need to think the schema changes. Like adding a colon is probably okay, and dropping it probably after several versions.
That's kind of version migrations of the database. So we don't drop the column right now. We just mark it as it's going to be dropped, and after the final changes, we can drop it in another version, in another release of our application. Yes, that's the evolution, database evolution, evolutionary migrations. But yeah, database first approach is a bit more complex in terms of updating code, but it is much better in terms of the database performance and the correctness of the model. And nowadays, performance is the king. So we need to get to like push data out very fast. So again, we are updating our code based on our DB. So let's have how it looks in the development. We still have our visit application, but now we have another thing. We add to our clinic medicines. So we're using our medicines and we use our medicines in the visits. This is the many-to-many. So let me just execute the script. First medicine, and then let me add some data. So here is pretty simple thing. And now let me check that I have everything here. Yes, we have like visit medicines data. And now we need to update our data model. So I probably need to add many-to-many thing to my entity, but I can do it automatically. So let me add medicine entity first. Here you see we are importing columns, and we can even import references, but I want my references to medicine belong not to medicines, but to visits. So first I create my medicine entity, and after that I will cherry pick the changes to the visit entity. So here we are. We have medicine entity right now. And now I need to link it to the visit. So for a visit, we can say here, let me check the gutter, the most underrated feature. So let me see if I can join my medicine. Oops. So, yep, this is the app, and not everything works fine, but I can update my visits from here. So I'm creating entity attributes from the database and create references. So IntelliJ IDEA detects many-to-many relations and can update the code according to the database schema changes. We even detect many-to-many changes. We even detect those as those schema objects. And now you see we have our medicines set in the entity, and we will be able to see those medicines in our column. So let me again fetch type, make it eager, because, well, I just don't want to work with like fetching code differently this time. And let me restart the application. Oh, missing sequence. I forgot.
Oh, interesting, because you created the table with generated always, so there is a sequence, but
let
created
me
automatically in the database.
Yeah, let me just let me see what is that.
And it has
Medicine
generated
ID
a
sequence.
mapping with the sequence.
Medicine ID gen, sequences. Sorry, guys. Medicine ID sequence. That's weird. That's weird. So let me check it again. No, still an issue. Let me drop the sequence. The database requires it. Okay.
Because the sequence was created by the create table, because it was a generated always, but it should not have generated a generation type sequence. There is a generation type identity, I think.
No, it is sequence. It is sequence here. You see, medicine ID sequence. So
but
let
if
me.
the table is created with generated always as identity, then to map it, you should map it to a generation type identity. Because with sequence,
it was created.
Sequence.
Yeah. Let me just try and remove it. So something went wrong. Let me just try and remove it. And anyway, somehow it worked. So here in my generated request. Let's see how our visit works. And here in the visit for the vet, we have visit ID, we have visit date, we have veterinarian, and we have a bunch of medicines used for our vet. So yeah, something went wrong, but finally we could fix it in our generator. So this is the database first approach. You see that updating code from the database is usually tricky because, well, not all the generators can take into account all the database tips and tricks. Not all the IDEs can, not all the tools can just pick all the names correctly, but it is just a minor bugs for us. So yeah, development flow looks a bit different, but still, again, we have a task to merge database schemas, to merge scripts, and after that, we are going to apply them to the database. So what are the good things on DB first approach? First, we're getting highly optimized database. Second, this approach is the only approach in case we have shared database which is accessed by different applications which use different database access frameworks like Java, Node.js, etc., etc. So this is the database becomes the only single of the only point of truth. But still, when we write an application, when we implement the database, we need to consider the access approach to our database. So you see, those approaches are very similar. So basically, we can use them all. For example, based on our development phase, what can you suggest? When we are developing a feature, when we are not in production yet, or your feature is not in production yet, we can use code first approach because it's faster. It is easier. We don't need to think about optimization. We just need to implement a proper business process, proper business entities. We need to
you avoid what we often call premature optimization. Trying to build the best schema for an application you don't even know if it will go in production.
Yeah, sure. So that's the approach, code first approach, especially if you have a proper generator. Like I like Hibernate for its automatic DDL generation. So you don't think about the database schema, you just drop and recreate it like this. While
maybe
developing.
you will choose the database later. You may start your first prototype and then negotiate the price for Oracle or going open source. Or
time to market. Time to market matters. Yeah. So and when we are in production, then it is a different story. Here, data is the king. Here, performance is the king. So when your feature is in production, maybe applying database first approach is a better way because, well, you need to carefully tune your database. You need to carefully tune your model and then slightly change your code if it is required. So, and the second thing, surprisingly, database access frameworks can also impact your choice of the approach. For example, for JPA, which is the most frequently used Java framework for accessing the database, well, Hibernate, but it is the JPA standard. So both approaches work fine because Hibernate is very powerful in generating schema. It was the feature that was like from the beginning of this framework. And still, we can use DB first and choose data, update your entities based on the database changes. But if we are going to use pure JDBC or Spring Data JDBC, database first probably kind of natural choice for your development style because, well, neither Spring Data JDBC and pure JDBC cannot generate your model based on the entities model. Well, yeah. And when we're talking about the popular framework called Juke, you heard about it for sure. This is the DB first in its like natural way because the Juke generates code based on database. It regenerates the code. It regenerates its kind of entities based on the database. So it is the DB first framework. And this, I think, is the key to the win of DB first guys, because a lot of frameworks are natural for DB first approach. And again, a lot of guys think about DB performance before implementing the code. But again, while you are not in production, and if your framework allows that, just drop and create, experiment, and after that, fine-tune your update scripts. So, who owns the data model? So, to my mind, and you can argue with me, code owns the business model, code owns the domain, code owns the algorithms of data processing, and DB owns the data. DB is responsible for storing data, for storing it in for modeling domain from the data point of view, from the data storage point of view, and DB owns kind of non-functional requirements, like kind of non-business requirements like performance and optimization. So again, there is no simple answers for questions like there is no simple answer for an ego chicken question. So here
and there is no magic. You have to synchronize something. There is no way where it will magically synchronize without you checking. So,
yeah, for sure, especially in production. We can magically synchronize by dropping and recreating the whole database, but it's not the way. There is no free cookies. Yeah. So again, here I would say that guys use hybrid approach. When you do some active development, use code first. Local development, use code first. No problem with that. When it becomes when your database becomes the bottleneck, apply DB first. Tune your database according to the database features. Apply just complex indexes and move it to your move the changes into your application so you will work in the most efficient way. If the database is the only source of truth, DB first is your choice. And use migration tools. Always use migration tools. Yeah. By the way, Frank, the final question: do you prefer Flyway or Liquibase?
I have no strong opinion. I think from seeing the usage, I think it's maybe simple with Flyway, but there are more possibilities with Liquibase, and I'm in favor of more possibilities because I know that you may have to do complex things in the database.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Great answer. So I think that concludes our talk. Thanks everyone for coming. So now I'm ready to answer your questions.
Hi, Andrey and Franck. That was an amazing session. It was wonderful to learn from you. But before I talk any further, everyone who's watching, please share your feedback about the session. You can either use the link which is displayed on the screen, or you can scan the QR code. And with that, I will let the slide be on the stream for a while. And then let me just display the questions that we had. And I know Franck,
sorry, Mala. Yes. Yeah, just out of curiosity, who won in our poll?
Interesting
Good
question.
Let me look. Oh, it's very close. Yes. I see 54% for code first and 46% for DB first.
So it's pretty. So it is close to the statistics that I showed before. Yeah, fantastic. Yes. Thanks.
No change. So code first wins by a small margin, but yes, code first wins. But
no, DB first. DB first, no?
No,
The
code
first
first
one,
is
code first,
54.
code first.
Code first is winning.
Yeah,
Oh,
50.
Yes.
that's
Yes.
still a small
Interesting.
margin, but now it's
Yes.
just
Yes.
inclining to code. Okay, great.
Yes. But as
Personally, I'm even more convinced by DB first because I've seen how it was easy to merge to the code. I thought it was more
Okay.
difficult.
as a person who started writing DB applications first, I agree with Frank because I also kind of tend to lean more towards DB first. And as Andrey said, the data lives longer than the applications. But yes, there are different opinions. So, and yes,
No,
Andrey also talked. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry.
sorry, no, I just saying that in the chat there is also a lot of it depends is the missing one.
Yes.
And of course, and you said on what it depends. For example, the life cycle of the application. When you start, you probably have a lot of changes in the schema and you want to do code first. After 10 years, probably you are changing a lot of things in the code, but not changing the columns and in the table so often. So that's the it depends. Yeah.
Right. That makes sense. And as Andrew talked about, there's so many different reasons why one would prefer code first or DB first. And of course, he also talked about hybrid. So yes, so that's a good thing to consider. Now I would show uh, the questions that we had. And I know, Frank and Andre, you were covering a couple of questions while you were talking in your session. So if you think that something is redundant, you've already addressed that, just let me know and I would remove
Yep.
that. And so the first one is, of course, you would have to kind of revisit the topics that you presented. So Urs mentioned, I first defined domain model as data classes, otherwise Uncle Bob will spank me. That's an interesting comment.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's just a comment. Yeah, but why
Uncle
not?
Bob
Yeah.
has lot of recommendation on clean code and yeah.
It is a fair point. As soon as it doesn't hurt your application development speed, or it doesn't increase your tech debt, yeah, you can use whatever you want.
So the answer is it depends, and do not go by what someone says. Really, kind of figure out what your scenario is, what's the use case is, and
Yeah.
what is it that you are trying to achieve. That makes sense. So the next one is by Mikhail. I don't think we are into different times. I may start with a small ER model, but basically I iterate.
Yeah. Fair
That's a
point.
fair point. The next one is by Mohammed, and he says separate application data model from the DB data model and adapt the later from or to the former. Again, fair point.
That's the fair point. But again, so this is what probably Juke is good at. So you're implementing. You have a business model, you have like a data model, and then you just connect them. So here, DTOs play a good role as a like data transfer between different layers. So you have two separate layers, and yeah, that's a good thing.
And
But
with Juke, it's easy to see if it doesn't match because it is type safe. So probably you quickly see what you have to change.
yeah, but it unfortunately this introduces like one additional layer of abstraction, which is responsible for connecting your business model to your data model. But again, that's the fair point.
Right. And I always find abstraction tricky because when we talk about introducing another layer, we kind of lose the great features that we have for, let's say, the database, and we are talking about generalizing a lot of things, and we lose the power of what one has to offer because databases are very strong. They offer great features, but when we introduce abstraction layer, we try to generalize, but we lose the power. We get some advantages and a lot of disadvantages, I would say.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next one is by Karthik. It says, I think app and DB goes hand in hand. So I think that was a
Karthik is
similar.
in both camps. Yeah.
Yes, the golden mean. Okay, so there's another comment by Urs, and he says, if you need to fast save some data, it's better DB first approach. If you need to fast develop app, it's better app first. Yes, this is exactly what Andrey mentioned. So if you want to add, or I'll just go to the next.
Yeah.
No, that's right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So Alex says, no, I hit the comment. Alex says, I do prefer the database approach, but also depends if the business has the idea of what they want clear. Changing the schema at the middle of coding is always a problem.
Very true. Yeah.
That's why code first works fine when you do active development. When the business doesn't have an idea, and and in each sprint you have a different set of requirements, and they can change every week. So that's why probably in the beginning code first wins.
I have seen some projects where after many months they were still changing the primary keys because they did not know what
Oh
was
my
the
God.
key of their data.
That hurts.
That really hurts. And this is one of a good way to kind of figure out what approach do you want to go with. Do you want code first or DB first? So if people are unclear, which they usually are, DB first. So the next one is by Romeo, and the comment is API first means using ORM framework. It's still code first.
Yeah.
Comment,
Sounds
question. Good. Okay. So the next one is
Maybe
by.
it was I think it was an answer to this question. Maybe no.
Come again.
I don't know.
Please?
Yeah. Let's go to the next question.
Okay. So the other one is by Sami, and the comment is, I recommend API first application. I mean, let the DB or other data sources behind on the API, and in parallel develop the application.
That's a very fair point. But again, this is the introduction of an additional layer of abstraction. So in this case, again, we say that database is just a data source for our application. So we don't know how it works. We just cover it with the layer of abstraction of the API. It works fine as, in our microservices world, it works like a charm because you can just simply separate your database part and replace it with API calls. But yeah, we are just introducing an additional thing, and still you'll need to implement something to work with database. So when you will implement this something, which will translate database calls into API calls and vice versa, which approach will you use?
Makes sense. So there's another comment. The name is hidden. The comment is, I think both approaches are useful. The important thing is to identify when to use one approach instead of the other. That makes perfect sense. So there's a follow-up comment which says, in some cases, you could even start the code strategy, and as the project matures, change to the database approach.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you need also that managers understand that it's not something that they can state for the whole life cycle of the application.
Makes sense. So there's another comment, this comment by Steve, and he is asking, what about applying versioning to your APIs?
Yeah, that's the different talk. I think it is the topic of a different talk. The API versioning and evolving APIs of your application is kind of different talk.
Okay, so Steve has another question. Can you apply database migrations with JPA?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Absolutely.
There's a comment by Sami, code against the hypothetical API, then write integration test for this API, then implement the API, then implement storage mechanism, then write some E2E test.
Yeah. This is just another approach of a good application. Yeah, API first approach. So it works fine. We just talking about different architecture. That's fine.
So there's a lot of other questions coming in. Right. Just what's happening? Okay. So did I? No. Okay, so this is a comment by Andres, and I think he's talking about the power of the databases. So because you were talking about choosing one, so he said, accept those unfortunate enough to deal with stored procedures as business logic.
This is
very good point. And this is also where the database first approach came.
Yes.
Long time ago, when people were building all the code in the database, of course it was database first because everything was there. But then it's harder to maintain
Just
and find
remember
developers.
Oracle introducing web servers in their databases, etc. So
Yes.
guys. So
So there's a comment by Steve. Consider data governance and lineage. Large organizations struggle with what data is the right data in terms of accuracy, quality, etc. API approach which interfaces with a data catalog.
I'm sorry, I don't exactly get it.
So yes, it's unclear whether it's a question, comment. So let's move on to the next one. So this is a comment by Suman Adhikari, and he's asking which tool do you prefer, Liquid Base or Flyway DB?
So Franck prefers Liquid Base, so do I.
And you?
Yeah, so do I. It was my kind of first tool for database migration, so I prefer it since I just worked with that for a longer time. But I like Flyway for its conciseness because it's just a pure SQL, and you can write some complex migrations in Java, so it is also a good thing.
So this next question by Bordan, and he's asking which approach feels more natural in your opinion for JetBrains exposed?
So I don't.
Yes, that's unclear.
For me, the natural approach is a hybrid approach. So again, I just talked about that. So it depends on your phase of the development. I prefer code first during the feature implementation when something changes, and then database first when you just need to optimize and tune something.
So the next question is by Sami. How can we apply clean code or agility in the DB first world?
In the same way as you usually apply. So just develop a feature, develop a code, verify that it works fine. So it's not about the philosophy. It's just the way you write your code and which way you choose. So how you would synchronize your database schema with code or code with your database schema. It's just the matter of choosing the approach. It's not about methodology. Yeah.
In the organization also, if you have an application DBA, in operations, DBA do not have time to do that. So you need someone in the application team who knows well the database and can discuss with the developers.
Yeah.
So there's another one by Bert. If the code first is better for pre-production phase and data first is better in production, then data first wins because most of the time you are maintaining an existing productive app.
That's the point for sure. Yeah. So most of the time you will be updating the database rather than your code, but when you develop a new feature, yeah, that's vice versa. So yeah, fair point.
So a similar one by Andrey's coding to the database works nice in the beginning, but in code base, which older than 10 years, a disaster.
Yes.
It's not about database, it's just the life as it is. So dealing with legacy is always a disaster.
So we are. So that was the last comment or the question that I wanted to. So again, a couple of thanks. Personal account says thanks. It was a great talk and really good presentation. But time flew. Wow, that's a good comment. And thanks, ladies, and thanks, guys. Wow, lovely. Is it okay?
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Andrey and Franck. It was lovely to learn from you. Andrey, I loved how the session was slow paced and you both were talking with each other. So that was kind of made it. I think that the interaction really helped me to understand a lot of things. So thank you so much. That was good. That was good.
Thank you. Thank you.
And
Mama.
the comments and remarks were also really good. It's good to be live.
Yeah. Thanks everybody who was attending us. Yeah. Your comments are great.
Thank you so much. And everyone watching, we have the socials for IntelliJ IDEA, Andrey, and Frank. So if you want to follow them, ping them, these are the links that you can use. And we'll share the presentation by Andrey and the code base, and we'll add them, the links to the description of the video. So you can check back that in a day probably. So that would be good. And of course, if you like to debug your applications, who doesn't? We have another session lined up for this month, which is on 25th of July, the same time, 3 to 4 UTC. And you'll hear about the excellent debugging features that we have in IntelliJ IDEA. And until then, thanks for joining in and subscribing to our channel. Before I close the stream, Andrey and Frank, if you have any closing comments.
Thank you.
Just thanks everybody. Yeah, it was a great time.
Yes, I loved it. I loved it. Thank you, everyone, for attending, for asking questions, for answering questions. Yes, and I hope you learned a lot. I definitely did. So until next time, bye bye.
Bye now.